You're listening to Rethinking Trade with Lori Wallach.
Small business owners and farmers are protesting the Korean
WTO and NAFTA are transnational forms of autocratic governance that subordinate
a
our
North American free trade agreement.
Seattle has never seen anything like it.
Mexican workers face threats of violence.
Trade policy has delivered one punch in the gut after another.
Welcome back to Rethinking Trade, where we don't just talk about trade policy, we fight to change it. I'm Ryan, and I'm joined once again by our in-house trade expert, Lori Wallach. Lori, earlier this month, a Canadian company called TC Energy filed a claim for $15 billion in compensation from the U.S. government for allegedly violating the terms of the North American Free Trade Agreement's Investor-State Dispute Settlement System by revoking the permits for the infamous Keystone XL pipeline. Now, in our last episode, we looked at the revised NAFTA, now the USMCA, 1 year after it went into effect. One of the big victories in the fight around the USMCA was the gutting of ISDS. But before we get deeper into what ISDS is, how it works, and how a case is being launched even after the USMCA went into effect, can you just tell us about what this case looks like and what it could mean for the U.S. and for U.S. taxpayers?
So as you said, this corporation is demanding $15 billion with a B dollars in U.S. taxpayers' money to compensate them for the denial of their special rights as foreign investors under NAFTA, because they are claiming that the future expected profits that would accrue from this XL pipeline had it gone forward would sum up to $15 billion, and that they have a right as a foreign investor to be able to complete this project. And if any U.S. government action stops it, we taxpayers have to compensate them. That is the infamous Investor-State Dispute Settlement System, which grants rights to foreign corporations to sue the U.S., Mexican, or Canadian government before a panel of 3 corporate lawyers. The lawyers can award the corporations unlimited sums to be paid by America's taxpayers, or Canadian taxpayers, or Mexican taxpayers, including for the loss of their expected future profits. And these foreign corporations only need to convince the lawyers that a law or a safety regulation, or in this case, a permit for a dangerous pipeline, violates their NAFTA rights. The decisions are not subject to appeal, and the amount awarded has no limit. And this part of NAFTA was largely eliminated. With respect to Canada, it was simply ended. And with respect to Mexico, the worst features were eliminated. However, those new rules phase in over 3 years. So this is what is called a legacy case. We are 1 year into the new phase in, 2 more years to go. So this case can still go forward.
And for the listeners, we covered a lot about ISDS in our 10th episode of the podcast, when there were lawsuits being threatened to keep factories open during the early days of the pandemic. I would encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. But Lori, let's get a little deeper into the ISDS system. And then also let's talk about how it was gutted from the old NAFTA. We can talk a bit about the campaign. And then you already introduced us to the legacy cases, but maybe you could explain a little bit more about what a legacy case is and what the phase-in looks like.
So a legacy case just means that a corporation still has a certain number of years as the Investor-State Dispute Settlement System phases out of NAFTA to be able to still bring cases. And it's 3 years, 1 year down. So a legacy case is basically using the old NAFTA provisions before they phase out. And the process basically is a corporation gives notice of an intent to file what is officially an arbitration. Only the corporations can start these cases. Governments can't sue the corporations for bad behavior. The rights are only for investors to attack governments and their regulations. And once an investor starts a case, if it's within the 3-year phase out, even after ISDS phases out, the case goes forward. So it is a very pernicious facet of NAFTA, and it's from our perspective, too long of a transition in getting rid of those terms. There are questions about the standing for this case, and there will be legal fights about whether or not particular rights were denied. The problem is the decisions get made by 3 ad hoc appointed, just for the case, billing by the hour, corporate lawyers. And these, mainly men, make their money by serving on these tribunals, and only the corporations can start the cases. So there's a deep financial incentive to rule for the corporations because the corporations get to pick one of the judges. There are 3 of them. The corporation picks one, the government picks one, and then those 2 will pick a third. So it's this club where you're likely to get picked by the corporation, and the corporation's the one that starts the cases if you rule for the corporations. So very few of the people, the corporate lawyers who specialize in these kind of cases. And by the way, they bill like $800 an hour. So even if they're going to eventually dismiss a case, it's in their interest for it to go for a long time, which is why on average, even in the cases that are dismissed, governments pay between $5 and $8 million in legal fees. That's when they win. So it's a real scam, and it can't go away fast enough.
For many countries, I mean, for the US can afford to enter the legal process around this lawsuit. But for many countries, much poorer countries, even the threat of one of these cases might as well be one of the cases, right? Like companies can often get what they want simply by suggesting that they could launch a case.
ISDS works as a threat because historically, so many of the tribunals and the corporate lawyers rule in favor of the governments. And for a lot of particularly developing countries, if they figure they're going to have to pay anyway, they don't want to spend the extra millions fighting the case along the way. They'd just rather try and settle it, pay off the corporation, roll back the law in question. And it's not all developing countries that do that. There's an infamous case where Canada reversed an environmental regulation banning a toxic substance so that a U.S. corporation, the Ethel Corporation, would end their lawsuit. And part of the settlement was that Canada had to publish in newspapers around the world that this chemical is perfectly safe, and as well as allowing it to be sold again in Canada. So it's a rough form of corporate bargaining where the sort of Damocles is basically hung of the prospect of not just a lot of money in damages to have to be paid off by taxpayers, but years of litigation and millions of dollars in legal fees. It is, a really outrageous and pernicious system.
And so there's 2 big things at play regarding ISDS in North America, specifically in the USMCA. And the first are those legacy cases, which you described earlier. The second is the carve-out in the USMCA that maintains ISDS rules for a narrow but fairly important sector of industries. Can you talk about this carve-out and what we need to be on the lookout for?
So the carve-out is an exclusion to the termination of the old NAFTA Investor-State, and it applies the old ISDS rules to contracts that currently 7 U.S. oil and gas companies have. It's 13 contracts that were made under the old NAFTA that are specifically with one particular Mexican government agency that has to do with oil and gas exploration. And the rule is, as long as Mexico keeps investor-state dispute settlement, the old kind, with other countries whose firms have those kind of contracts, then this carve-out allows the U.S. companies to have access to the same extreme corporate rights that their competitor, other foreign investors in Mexico's oil and gas sector have. And it was, one of the, really disappointing things that ended up marring what would have otherwise been an incredible victory on ISDS. So when activists look at this rollback of ISDS, which NAFTA was the first agreement into which first trade agreement into which ISDS was inserted. So to have the United States, which has been a great proponent, shoving ISDS in other countries and being a big benefactor and defender of it, to have the United States say, we're ending it with this country and we're cutting it back enormously with this other country, symbolically around the world empowers a lot of other countries who are trying to exit this outrageous regime. But the sour aftertaste was that this carve-out meant, with respect to those contracts and those companies, indefinitely until Mexico actually decides to get out of ISDS, which would be a very smart thing, then these U.S. firms keep the legacy of the old NAFTA.
Sort of as you were just alluding to, Lori, there was a lot of hope when the USMCA was passed regarding the future of ISDS, not just within the context of the USMCA, but throughout the world. Obviously, NAFTA was not the only deal. It was the first, but not the only to have ISDS rules. What are some of the big fights ahead in confronting and continuing to dismantle ISDS globally?
So a lot of very important developing countries have showed leadership in getting out of ISDS. South Africa started the trend, and then Indonesia joined in. Brazil has never had ISDS agreements. Bolivia and Ecuador both got out. Heartbreakingly now, the right-wing government in Ecuador is trying to get back in. A lot of countries looked to those countries. India renegotiated its agreements to get rid of most of the pernicious elements. So when the U.S. joined in as a main proponent, benefactor, and defender of ISDS, and also a developed country, it was a super important impact worldwide where lots of countries want to get out of their investor agreements and or, if not get out of them altogether, to roll them back to something more like the Mexico model that is in the USMCA, which, like the India revised model, requires a corporation to use up all of its domestic enforcement options before it can even contemplate going to a panel, and then only allows direct expropriation compensation as compared to all of the fancy, silly, made-up rights the corporations jammed into deals like NAFTA and others. And so I think that with the Trump administration, which is, basically Donald Trump, a wholly owned corporate subsidiary with right-wing tendencies in addition, to make clear that even they thought ISDS was a bridge too far, made it such that with a Democrat, Biden, saying his trade agreements wouldn't have ISDS, it's now become really the U.S. position that that old regime is no longer acceptable, tolerable, and that's good for us. That's good for the countries with whom the U.S. would have trade agreements, but it also opens up space for the many countries around the world that are smaller countries, that are developing countries, to basically take the cover of the U.S. taking that action with NAFTA.
Rethinking Trade is produced by Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. To learn more, you can visit rethinktrade.org. You can also visit tradewatch.org. Stay tuned for more, and thank you for listening.